Okay, so the title of this is going to refer to the non-farm payroll report. I'm going to talk about that first, but just to let you know, later on after that, I want to take some time just to say something about Disney. I know that those two things don't go together, but I don't do multiple uploads a day, so I'm just going to talk about it at the end of this one. But starting with the non-farm payroll report, we're being told there was a very good jobs report today. This is the CNBC narrative. This is the Bloomberg narrative. This is the entire media narrative. Great jobs report, better than expected. You know, the Wizards of Smart predicted 200,000 new jobs created in the month of November. But magically, 263,000 were created instead. Oh my gosh, the Biden boom is real. There is no recession. Everything is going great. Some people, I think, using this in a good way to try and say, oh, we see the Fed should keep hiking 75 basis points every month, because obviously it's had no negative impact. I do wish that the Fed would keep doing that, although, this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek, dishonest way of advocating that, because the non-farm payroll report is completely misleading. Despite the fact that 263,000 jobs technically were added to non-farm payrolls in the month of November, 138,000 less people now are employed. How does that work? Well, people are getting laid off from their jobs. People are losing their jobs or quitting. And other people who already have a job are taking on second and sometimes third jobs. That's what we've been seeing now for months. We're seeing less and less people working and more people working multiple jobs. That's not the sign of a healthy economy. That's the sign of a very, very weak and unfair economy in which people can't get ahead, in which people cannot make ends meet. You don't take on multiple jobs because the economy is doing so well. You take on multiple jobs because the economy, your personal economy, sucks. And when we're seeing writ large people take on multiple jobs, that means that the economy for a good chunk of the population sucks. And other people are doing even worse because they don't have a job at all. Now, some of those people you could say, well, hey, how could you say there's a shortage of jobs if some people are able to find second jobs? Wouldn't you think that all those jobs would be taken up by people who don't have a job already? In some cases, no. We know the way that the welfare system works in this country. At a certain extent, if you're not able to make enough money working your job, in a lot of cases, in a lot of parts of the country, you're better off having no job, because working a little bit penalizes you a lot when it comes to public welfare. It's not like there's a sliding scale to where, hey, you're working a job, but, you can't quite make ends meet. Oh, you can get welfare to close that gap. No. If you're working at all, a lot of the times you get no welfare. And if your job pays you less than, what you would make in welfare payments, you're either going to quit your job or you're not going to even apply for that job. Now, if you're already working a job that's not making a lot of money, and you have the opportunity to apply for a job that is also going to pay you not that much on its own, but when you put the two together, you might be able to make ends meet, well, then you're going to be willing to take on a second job, even if it is a job that doesn't pay very well. But if you're someone who has, only one job and you're not making very much, and you get laid off, or if you get laid off and you were making enough, but now the only jobs you can find pay you less, you're incentivized by the way that the welfare system works not to take on that job. And so I think that's why we're seeing so many people. Now, I think Zero Hedge put the number at like 2.7 million, the gap between jobs that have been created and the number of people actually working in the economy. The gap between jobs and workers has been widening significantly over the past few months. It used to be that jobs and workers, ran right. They were basically the same number, because everyone who had a job generally had one job. It was very rare for people to have multiple jobs. But now it's becoming quite normal. And all this while we officially are still not in a recession. And officially, inflation is transitory. Officially, the Fed's not worried about inflation. That's why they're going to end the rate hikes. In fact, I said the other day that I thought, well, if they're tapering rate hikes now, they're at 75, they'll probably do a couple months at 50 basis points and, a couple months at 25 basis points after that, and sort of, actually taper off smoothly the rate hikes before they start cutting rates inevitably, I think before the end of 2023. Because as I said in a previous video, and many times in the past, this is common knowledge, recessions typically begin officially after the Fed finishes hiking rates, and sometimes even after the Fed starts to cut rates. It doesn't usually coincide immediately with the hikes itself, because it takes a bit of time for the hikes to really have their full effect. It's what old Milton Friedman called the long and variable lag. So I expected there to be about 150 basis points total in additional rate hikes on deck if the Fed tapers at a somewhat smooth pace. But a lot of people, including the bond market, seems to think that the Fed is going to taper very rapidly and that they're going to go basically a 50 basis point hike in December and maybe a 25 basis point hike in January, and that's going to be it. And we're going to be over. We're going to be done with rate hikes. And so that would put us at what, like 4.25%, 4.5% on the Fed funds? It's still quite low, historically speaking. But if you look back to like the 2008 crisis and stuff, 4.5% would be enough, should be enough, to break our financial economic bubble. Because as discouraged, as I get about saying these things and thinking, oh gosh, I'll just be wrong. The only reason why we didn't have the real crash back in 2020, back in, I think we were already seeing it in 19 and 18. The only reason why they've been able to kick the can down the road was because of the massive stimulus, which the government unveiled supposedly to fight the Wu flu. That was the justification back then. But really, that was all that kept us propped up. If there had been no Wu flu, had there been no Wu flu stimulus, we would have been officially in a recession a very, very long time ago. And all of these actions were, completely unprecedented. But the only reason they were able to do all that was because the official inflation rate back then was quite low. It was under 2% most of the time. And now we don't have that same situation. Would I put it past Congress to pass a massive stimulus bill when we have high inflation, when we have a problem with inflation? No, I wouldn't put it past them, but it's harder to get done now. They don't have that same wiggle room. And if they do it, once the inflation's already kicked off, you're more likely to stimulate inflation and not really any real demand. Demand in real terms. Because the only way that stimulus works, the only way that printing money and spending it works, is if the market at large is not anticipating it and they don't adjust their prices at a 1-to-1 ratio with the increase in the money supply. But if the country's already in an inflationary mood like we are right now, everyone is going to see the stimulus and brace for more price increases. We hadn't seen inflation like this in 40 years when the CARES Act was passed, and so there were a lot of businesses and individuals who just were not prepared for inflation. They weren't expecting it. But when they are expecting it, inflation comes much quicker, and it comes much harder. But, these things take place over many years. Economic history plays out over a long period of time. And if you think about how long this channel's been around, about 4 years or so, I guess maybe I'm going into my 5th year, that's not a very long period, in the grand scheme of economic history. That's why I remain confident that this crash is inevitable, although I don't put money on it because I'm not going to try and time it. If I tried to time it, 5 years ago, when this was just as possible, back when we were witnessing the beginning of the crash back in late 2018. That's when it should have happened. Without Powell's flip-flop back then, if I tried to do it back then, I would have lost all my money. So I don't play the markets. I'm not here giving financial advice. I'm not trying to tell people how to make money. I don't know how to make money. If I knew how to make money, I wouldn't be rambling on YouTube. I'd be off, making lots of money speculating on asset prices. What I try and do here when I talk about the economy is look at fundamentals and examine what is currently happening and what must happen in the future, where we go from here. And that's always a very difficult question. Where do we go from here? But I think that when it comes to the economy, it's pretty clear that we can't go on like this forever. The timetable, though, is determined largely by confidence and by how long people are willing to play the game. It's like Lehman Brothers. How did they go bankrupt overnight? Well, all of a sudden, Lehman Brothers, their balance sheet was full of what were one day very liquid assets that all of a sudden became illiquid because people decided, I don't want to buy those. And when there's no buyers, your mark to market goes to zero. And then your net worth, your balance sheet goes to zero. And then if you have any debt, well, your debtors are going to come knocking and say, hey, your balance sheet is crap. You've got worthless pieces of paper. That's all you've got stowed away in your safe. Well, I want my money back. You see, if Lehman Brothers didn't have any debt and they just owned all of those mortgage-backed securities outright, they might not have had to take that big of a hit. But because everyone else in the country lost confidence in Lehman Brothers, that's why they went under. And the same is true for the overall economy. The economy is built on a foundation of sand, and that sand is held together by confidence. There is no cement that comes into the mixture. And that's why you ultimately can't time these things. You can't predict, unless you're really in tune with the zeitgeist, when people are going to change, because it changes on a dime. Now, you can see it coming, sure. Lots of people have seen it coming. Lots of people saw it coming in 2008. Lots of people saw it coming, with the dot-com boom. They looked at Pets.com and they said, this isn't a real company. Plenty of people have looked at Tesla and said, this is not a real company. This is all hype. Yet Tesla marches on. Yet Tesla, despite, how many people they've killed with their faulty cars, with their insane, lithium-ion pipe dream. Nevertheless, Tesla has a higher market cap, last I checked, than the entire rest of the auto industry combined. And there's nothing rational about that. It's all subjective feelings and confidence. But perhaps if the job losses get bad enough, that will have a sort of that the effect of that will sort of trickle up to Wall Street eventually. And they'll see, hey, people aren't buying as much stuff as they used to. I wonder why that is. We're not able to sell things to them. And then they'll realize, oh, wait, there's a lot of people who don't have jobs anymore. Oh, and the people who still do have jobs are working all the time, so they don't have time to just consume frivolous things. They're worried about just paying their rent and, being able to put bread on the table. So, Wonder Bread stock might be doing very well. But the rest of us are not. So, with that said, I want to have a last word today. I don't do a lot of culture war stuff. I try, in fact, when I started this channel, I explicitly tried to avoid it, but, I find it more interesting and more important as the years go by, for reasons that I outlined earlier in this video. Confidence is what matters. What people think, what they feel, That's what runs the world. And that's why the culture war is so important. You can move mountains by convincing people that something feels good or that something is good. I've witnessed this in my own lifetime. American culture's been turned upside down. And things that were perfectly fine and normal and moral, in fact, considered to be very good when I was a kid, already, despite the fact that I'm in my 20s, they already are an anathema. They're to modern American civilization. So one of those things is apparently a Walt Disney World ride called Splash Mountain, which I remember riding once as a kid. I was never a fan of Disney. I never really liked Disney movies as a kid. But I have been to Disney World once or twice. And I remember Splash Mountain, Thunder Mountain, Space Mountain. Well, Thunder Mountain, that's already been canceled, turned into something else, wokeified. I don't know what was ever wrong with Thunder Mountain. Then I heard now today they're shutting down Splash Mountain too. And I had to look into this a little deeper. And apparently Splash Mountain is based off of a Walt Disney movie that was canceled long, long ago and has never been released on home video in America. And it was called Song of the South. And as you can imagine, it was about the Old South, and it had Disney characters, and it had some, I don't know, it looks like it's about I recognized all the characters, so I've seen them somewhere. I mean, I know I've seen this film around, but it's kind of funny. It's like, what do they call that? It's like a reverse Mandela effect. Or it's like, like those people who think that Sinbad was in a movie about a genie called Shazam, whereas in reality, it was Shaq, and it was called Kazam. Or I might be having it backwards. The Sinbad one might be real. But no, I think it was Shaq. It was in Kazam. And people, they think in their head, no, I swear, I saw it when I was a kid in the theaters. It was Sinbad, and it was called Shazam. Well, that's how I felt when I looked at, screenshots of this old Disney movie. Like, and then, of course, there's the song Zippity Doo-Dah, which apparently comes from this. And so I had to import this from overseas before they find a way of outlawing it, because I have to preserve this, because Disney is apparently doing everything they can to erase its existence. There's Splash Mountain, I think, was the only evidence of it ever existing, other than the memories in the heads of old people who saw it as a child back in 1946. Apparently, it was also released on its 40th anniversary in 1986. But to me, this seems like a very interesting cultural artifact, and I'm curious, does anyone who's listening to this, have you ever heard of Song of the South? I know it as a song by the band Alabama. I didn't know it was a Disney film. But do you, or anyone in your family, do you remember this? Do you like this movie? I didn't like Disney movies as a kid. I don't expect to really like it as an adult. But I have to watch it now, just because this is so interesting to me that they've gone so far out of their way to erase this. I mean, normally, like, memory hold stuff it's just so interesting to me, and for the most part, things don't get entirely, erased, especially in the age of the internet. Things are preserved all the time. But maybe it's one of those things like Keynes's original introduction to the German language edition of the General Theory, in which he praises the Nazi regime. That has never been republished in later editions. That's why it's only the introduction to the first edition of the German language version of the General Theory. But people have preserved it. You can find it online. If you just Google what I said there, Keynes's introduction to the German language edition of the General Theory, it'll come up probably, and talk about him, and you'll be able to read John Maynard Keynes, praising the Nazis. But I mean, it's just, I don't know. Maybe it's the collector in me. I love anything that's rare and obscure. And I find it strange that this movie, again, without seeing it, is such a pariah. When, it's getting a little harder, but, Gone with the Wind, they still play it on TV. It still exists. I think you can still buy Gone with the Wind on Blu-ray. In Goodwill many years ago, before all this anti-Southern stuff came into American culture, I remember seeing a VHS set of Gone with the Wind. It was like collector's edition, but it was on VHS, and I thought, oh, I don't want that. Now I really wish I had that, because that's going to be gone soon. Anything that's, you know, Southern themed. I mean, I've seen people in videos blur out the Confederate flag on the Trans Am and Smokey and the Bandit. You know, it really makes me wonder. I mean, as cucked as Southern Republicans are, I wonder if you go to small towns in like Alabama or Mississippi or Georgia, does it really feel like the South anymore? I mean, when I was a kid, the South didn't feel very far away, but as more people have moved in here, um, you know, and since 2015, certainly when the Confederate flag was canceled, again, prior to 2015, I'd never heard of this idea of the Confederate flag being racist. Nobody even talked about that. It was in Hollywood movies. It was not controversial. Howard Dean in 2004, you know, the Democrat, governor of Vermont, said he wanted to be the candidate of the guy with the Confederate flag license plate on his truck. That was 2004. That was the world I grew up in. Yet now the South is such a pariah, and I get that maybe apparently there's, you know, maybe like minstrel show type of cartoon images in Song of the South. Which again, I've never seen the movie, never heard of it. But even if it has, you know, racist stuff or whatever, it's from 1946. I mean, that was the culture back then. That was reality. How do you? I don't know. I shouldn't question the wokesters, because I mean they're turning Indiana Jones into a woman. Song of the South is like should be the least offensive thing they're doing. But that's how they get away with it, because they just go so crazy with everything else that, you know, even things like that, you know, a movie that nobody remembers because Disney's memory hold it, you know, being the ride being destroyed. Nobody will even question that. Nobody will even know what's going on. The only reason I know that it's happening is because wokesters are celebrating it on Twitter. And I had to look into this. I'm like, what the? Well, they're mad at Splash Mountain now? I mean, it's... So this really is almost like two separate videos, but I wanted to vent that a little bit. And if you, I guess I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.